Imagine if each morning when you wake up, you're smiling and looking forward to your day, knowing you are happy even while you're dealing with grief and loss. The Grief and Happiness podcast inspires, comforts, and supports you with each new episode. I'm Emily Threat, welcoming you to explore with me your life of endless possibilities. Aloha. I'm so glad that you joined us today. I have a very interesting guest, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation because she's got so many different things we can talk about. So we'll just see where it goes. So welcome, Christal. Can you tell us a little bit about you?
Oh, sure. Well, I think we connected because we both are very interested in talking about death and infusing conversations about end of life whenever possible. And I come to that for a couple different ways. When I lived in California, I was able to work on the campaign to bring end of life choice, medical aid in dying, death with dignity. Those are all different ways of talking about the process that is now legal and is now legal in, I believe, 10 states. And that allows somebody who is terminally ill to request a prescription that they can take to end their life on their own terms at a time of their choosing, if they have 6 months or less to live. So I became, really involved with telling people's stories who are at end of life, who want to make this choice, or whose loved ones didn't have that choice but would have liked to. And then I was really looking at it as a journalist and doing storytelling around that. And then I also trained to do crisis counseling, mental health work. I worked with the LAPD for about 12 years as a crisis responder, a volunteer crisis responder. So we were trained, and then we would be deployed when there were incidents with mass casualties or witnesses, or, a lot of times traffic accidents, situations where there are just a lot of people having the worst day of their lives that needed some psychological first aid, really simple stuff. A lot of it being around active listening. And then also connecting people to resources that they may or may not know that they're eligible for. So that was my sort of training, that broke me in. And then I started working on a suicide hotline and taking calls from people in distress. So I went from working on something that's considered assisted suicide. It's not, but it's often mistakenly referred to that. And then on the other side, helping people who want to die by suicide to realize that it's a passing feeling, and what can we do to address the underlying issue that is causing them to feel that way. Hopefully get them out of that dark place.
Yeah, it's a fascinating work to me. I think most people don't think about dying that much. They're not prepared when the time comes, and there's a level of shock. And the work that you did with the LAPD, that's fabulous. I own an ambulance company in California that's been in my family since 1960.
Wow.
So, yeah. And I used to go on ambulance calls and go to those really bad accidents when there's nobody there to help them or talk to them. And I was, of course, busy taking care of the injured. And I always felt like, wouldn't it be great if there was somebody who could talk to people in those situations? Because it's unexpected, totally unexpected, and nobody knows how they're going to react if something like that happens.
Knows. And it's interesting. I realized, I thought at first that I was volunteering to work, like I said, with people on the worst day of their lives. But what I realized is that we were providing so much support. We worked with the LAPD and also the LAFD, and these are people who see this every day and have a job to do. they are literally putting out fires or else securing a crime scene. And it's really takes a toll on their mental health to witness this and also not have it even be part of their job to help or to just witness for to be there with somebody as they're going through this. So if we could take that away from their job, that was also really helpful, I think.
Oh, I know it is. We had a
Mhm.
situation in the community where it's a small town where my company is, where the firefighters and the ambulance and police all work kind of together. They all know each
Mhm.
other because
Right.
there are not that many of them, so they all really do know each other and work together. And we had a really big fire where two firefighters died. And the responders, our guys we brought people in to help them out because it was just
Mhm.
such a shock, because you hear about things like that happening, but you don't think it's going to happen with you
Right.
and with
Right.
somebody you know and somebody close by. And that kind of counseling is so incredibly important. And it's just something that's left out in our society so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing was there were a lot of suicides.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of, one of the things that was really eye opening to me was the level of denial with family members who would have these outrageous stories about, somebody broke into the house and forced my son at gunpoint to hang himself in the closet because he would never do that of his own. And, just not really having a full grasp of the situation. It's just so surreal and trying to guide them through that. And just so, again, seeing the sort of the wider effects of suicide, of a suicide. I was at the suicide of someone who had a very famous parent. And so it became a really big story. And he had killed himself. He was at school and he had jumped from his dorm in the middle of a dinner that he was having with a group of friends. And so they were incredibly traumatized.
Oh, yeah.
And there was the whole element of, some people went and talked to the media, and it was pretty ugly.
It's it's just amazing. It it's if prevention was more possible, I think it'd be
Mhm.
great. I think we could do a lot better job in our country with mental health and helping people. But
Yeah. Well, we recently had this transfer to 988, right?
mhm.
So that's sort of a 911 for mental distress. And it's a fantastic concept. It's a great idea. But without adequate funding, what we're seeing now, coming up on 2 years of it being instituted, is that there's inadequate staffing, and that has led to an incredible amount of burnout among crisis counselors and backlog of calls, which is the worst thing for someone who's in crisis to be put on hold. And so that's something that I'm really concerned about. I mean, it all comes down to funding, allocation of resources, and, budgets are constantly being cut around mental health, which is not a good thing for any of us.
No, it's crazy. I think it has to do with a lot of denial in our country that nobody
Mhm.
I know would do something like that, and so I don't have to worry about it, or I don't have to think about it.
Well, or just a reluctance again to face it, to face anything around death, but certainly suicide. There's a stigma, which, in some ways, you can understand it, but in other ways, it's really debilitating to solving the crisis. It's a big part of the problem.
Yeah, it is. What what could just the general person do to be better prepared, or to, like, if somebody tells them that they're thinking about committing
Mhm.
suicide, what should somebody
Mhm.
do?
Mhm. Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, the most important thing to do is to connect them with and to take it seriously,
Mm-hmm.
let's start there, and provide, an ear and say, if you're feeling that way, it's actually quite natural. Thoughts of death are very natural. Having a bad day and sort of thinking it through and thinking it would be better if I'm not here is part of the human condition. But at the same time, giving it some space and just saying, like, what's going on? Do you want to talk? I'm here. And if you don't feel like talking to me, I'd like to give you, make sure you know that you call 988. It's a 24/7 free service, where you can talk to somebody who's trained, to help you de-escalate. Because one of the sort of mottos that I always have, like, pasted over my desk just to remind myself is, your now is not your forever. And what that means is suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And oftentimes something as simple as distracting yourself. A lot of times when I do talk to someone and we do an assessment of sort of, where they're at in the crisis, the conversation ends when we make up a safety plan. And a safety plan is, what are you going to do to keep yourself alive? And the basis of that is distracting yourself. The best thing you can do is go out and get some fresh air, change your environment, take a shower, hot shower, cold shower. Change your body temperature will change your mood. But also doing something that you enjoy, watching a goofy TV show, just completely distract yourself, reset your brain, and taking a nap. Always, so talking to somebody, reaching them where they're at, and not trying to, the worst thing you can do if someone is telling you that they want to kill themselves, sort of negotiate. Well, you don't want to do that to your family, or what about this, or what about that? That doesn't really help when someone's in crisis.
That I know that they could say something like to themselves. They might not say it out loud. Well, it's my family that's making me feel this way. And if you're telling them, what are you going to do to your family? That person might be going, okay, then I'm going to do it. So it will to get back at them or whatever. So it's
yeah, they'll miss me when I'm gone. Yeah,
yeah.
That kind of thinking. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's important to hear that and understand where it's coming from. But that, that in and of itself is obviously not a reason to take your own life. And so you need to have a little reminder, or even just to say, why don't you get some rest, go to sleep. If you think you can, just lie down and revisit it in the morning. If you still feel the same way, let's talk, or talk to 988. But chances are you're going to be in a different mood, and you're not going to feel like completely checking out.
Yeah, so I think that suicide is more pervasive than people realize.
Mm-hmm.
I know.
Yeah.
I taught writing at the university for many years, and sometimes when I'd have them be thinking about what they wanted to write about, we'd get into conversations, and one of the kids one day said something about knowing somebody who got shot, and I said, well, how many of you know somebody who got shot? And half the hands in the room went up.
Wow.
And one of the guys stood up and pulled up his shirt and said, well, here's where I got shot that time. And and it was amazing how that is. And if you ask people if they know people who are in trouble or could use help, most of them do. And at the same time, they don't have a clue what to do that would be helpful.
Well, you raise another issue, right, which is access to guns and the prevalence of guns. The country where I'm living now, there are no guns. There is no violence. There are no school shootings. It's a very safe place. It doesn't have to be the way that it is, but with the correlation between access to guns and suicide is incredibly high. And if we could work on gun control, that's another way to affect the suicide rate.
Yes, that wouldn't that be wonderful? I just got to do it. We have to pay attention to this because it's ridiculous the level it's gotten to. I've heard that we've had more mass shootings in 2024 than we have had days so far, and that's just very sad. Well, let's change it up a little bit. One of the things that we were talking about beforehand was living fully while you can.
Sure.
And
Yeah. And that, the wishes of the dying is something that, really made an impression on me. In the work that I was doing, I worked with nurses and doctors and a lot of people in hospice and end of life care. And I'm sure, everybody's familiar with there's always these articles about, the 5 wishes of the dying, the things I wish I knew. And it has to do with um, taking it easier on yourself, following your dreams, not giving up things for other people, you know, really, really basic stuff. But between the work that I was doing with death and mortality and a health scare that I had in my personal life, it just was time to actually live those things. I was tired of repeating them and posting stories and memes and, yes, this is so true. This is so true. And then realizing, well, what does that look like for me? And what that looked like for me was choosing to live somewhere where there was a different pace of life and there were different priorities and there was a lot more safety.
that's so wonderful. I know I was surprised when my husband said that he wanted to move to Maui from California. And
Yes.
okay. But I knew that he was on his way out. I figured he had enough time to move and be able to enjoy himself while he was here. But
Mhm.
it's a big decision to do that sort of thing. And I thought, I'm so glad that we were able to have those kinds of conversations that
Beautiful.
this is what I really want. And so
Yeah.
we would do that. And it really taught me to live a better life for myself now that he's transitioned. And I feel really good about decisions that I make. Like I'd always wanted to go to Tuscany and I'd always wanted to go to Bali. And so I went.
Wow.
And,
That's great.
and I think if I wouldn't have had that experience with him where we were doing what he wanted to do because he wanted to do it, and it turned out so beautifully that I thought I
Wow.
can do that too. And I can figure out what to do with my life so it can be my best life to live.
So you both gave each other that gift, really, by having that conversation and then you moved quickly on it. And so his last 2 years were so much more what he wanted. And then you continue to do that with what you want. I'm curious, did the fact that you you did live your dream together, did that at all mitigate your grief with your loss?
Well, the grief this time was different since I mentioned I've had 2 husbands die. And the first time it was kind of crazy because I thought I was totally prepared for it. My husband was a lot older and he'd been sick for 2 years before he died. And
Mm.
ironically, both of my husbands died of the same thing. That I had no idea my second husband would be having those conditions, but that's
Goodness,
what happened. And
I'm sorry.
well, it made me more prepared to deal with them a second time because I knew the steps to take. I knew what I needed to do to make things be the best that they could be. Where we was figuring things out with the
Mhm.
first time, and I'd been with my first husband who had been married for 22 years, and it was just and he was a bioethicist, and his specialty was living and dying, and he taught the class for all the nurses at the college where he was a professor.
My goodness.
That dealt with dealing with living and dying. So you'd think I would have been in pretty good shape having been with him and all the conversations we had and things. But
Yeah.
it still, when he was gone, it was tough. I just totally felt lost.
Yeah.
And it
I'm
took a lot of figuring out.
sure. And
Yeah.
that's why I asked the question, because I mean, it must, on the one hand, be you're that much more prepared.
Mhm.
But when it comes to grief and loss, I mean, I don't think there's any way to mitigate it.
There isn't. There are some things that can help, though. And
Mhm.
one of those things I didn't talk about was shock. My first husband who died was living in the moment. That was just, we never had a conversation about it. Where my next husband was all about living in the moment. And the more we did that, that's what made everything so good. That it just went really well. We just dealt with whatever needed to be dealt with when it was the moment that it was happening. So, like,
Beautiful.
yeah, one of the things, issues that he had as he was declining was that he couldn't see to read very well. He had problems with his vision, and he'd always been a big reader. He read lots of stuff, and somebody gave him a copy of a book that he really wanted to read. It had just come out. It was I don't remember the name of it, but it was about the last days of Martin Luther King.
Mm.
And he just thought that would be so interesting. And he tried to read it, and he said, I can't. I just I can't see the words well enough to read it. So I read it to him. We sat
Oh,
outside and I read the whole book to him. It took a while,
fantastic.
but it was that was a living in the moment thing. And it was
Absolutely.
we both felt really good about it because he was able to receive, and I was able to give something that really meant something to him, and spending that time together was really great. And we approached our moments in our life like that, so that
Mhm.
it made
Mhm.
things, even though we knew the direction it was going, we were able to be the best we could be with each other. And that I think was made all the difference in the world as far as grieving afterwards. I still missed him, and
Of
I still
course.
grieved.
No, no, of course.
I
It
did not grieve, but
naturally,
it was better,
I see.
easier.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of people don't think about.
Right.
That they get wrapped up a lot of times in anticipatory grief, where they
Yes.
know it's going to happen, and so they just kind of start separation before the time comes. And that just is hard on everybody. It's hard on them. It's hard on the person who's dying. So,
Correct. Well, and that brings up another issue that I think is really important to talk about with end of life, and that is making sure that your wishes are known
mhm.
to your loved ones, and specifically those who are making your medical end of life care decisions. It's amazing how these conversations either don't happen or they happen when it's too late. Families are destroyed by having conflicting ideas about what to do about a loved one who can no longer make their medical decisions, and what is quality of life. What is, do we keep someone alive medically with any means possible? Do we know, do they have a do not resuscitate order? What are these, things? And so something that you can do for your loved ones is absolutely a gift, is to make sure that you have an updated advance directive, right? You
Yes.
can download an advance directive from the internet. You don't need a lawyer. You don't need it's not, there, you don't need a notary. You simply answer a few questions about what your quality of life, where you think that it begins and ends, to help people make decisions if you are unable to.
That's so important. I have preached that for a long time
Yeah.
because my husband, who was the bioethicist, was big on that, and he'd do presentations on it because it was so important. And Ron and I took care of everything legally. We went to an attorney because there were a lot of complicated things. You can do it simply. I've helped people do it simply.
Yeah, it shouldn't be intimidating.
Yeah.
And I preached it for a long time and didn't even do my own. I mean, it's just so weird. It's like, I knew it. And then I just kept putting it off. And, how can I be talking about this and not have my own? It was like Madonna doing Get Out of the Boat. And then she had never registered to vote. Not that I'm comparing myself to her. But anyways, I'm of course I've done it now, and I can talk about how simple it is and so forth. But I know, it's reluctance, it's inertia, it's a lot of things that hold us back.
Yeah, it's admitting that you're going to die, and that's
facing your mortality.
Really hard for people. Another issue that I think people don't think about is we moved to Hawaii, and we have made all those arrangements with the attorney when we were in California. And when hospice, he was only on hospice for less than a week. But when they came to the house, they said, well, do you have a durable power of attorney for healthcare? And I said, oh, yeah, we've got all that. So I got it out and showed it to them. And they said, yeah, it doesn't work here. I said, you got to be kidding. We've got it all. The attorney did it. Everything's notarized. And they said, you have to have it on a green piece of paper, and you have to have it hanging on your refrigerator.
No way. That's
Hawaii.
The rules.
Wow. That's in Hawaii.
I mean, that's so specific, but wow, you did all that work and then it wasn't recognized. Any major life event, any move, any, death, marriage, any life event that you can think of, and certainly a move is an important one. It's not a one-time thing. Sometimes you have to update it.
Yeah.
Like a will.
There's so many things like that. After my mom died of a brain tumor that was inoperable. And she had one brother and several sisters, and there were two of them left at that time when mom died. So her other sister that was still there, it got very concerned about herself because she was divorced and she had one child, and that child was not really capable of making decisions. He'd been in an accident that she didn't want him to be in that position because she knew that he wouldn't know what to do. And so when one of my other aunts died in a car accident, we went afterwards to a gathering, and that my aunt came up to me and said, there's something I've got to tell you. And I said, what? And she said, well, I know I was supposed to make arrangements for what's supposed to happen with me and who would do what and everything. And so she said, I went to my attorney and we got it all done. And I made you in charge of all of my affairs. And I said, okay. She said, are you willing to do that? I said, sure. I said, when did you do this? And she said, a few years ago.
Yeah, usually you check first.
Yeah, it was. I thought, I'm so glad she told me, because I ended up eventually having to get conservatorship of her.
Did you really? Oh my goodness.
And had she not told me, if we hadn't been able to have that conversation, that real genuine conversation about what do you want to do if this happens, or, what decisions are you making that I'm just implementing for you? And I was so glad that I was able to do that. But if I would have just had if we would have found out after she died that I was supposed to be taking care of those things, and she thought I was because she put my name down, that would have been devastating for me.
Does not go without saying, for sure.
Yeah.
I want to mention I've encountered so many interesting people trying to come up with innovative ways to get us to think about death and dying. And I think I mentioned to you that I went to my own funeral. I went to a death over dinner, where you talk about not just your losses, but your own thoughts about your own death and what you would like. And then they had a coffin, and we each took a moment to lie in the coffin and
Mm.
think back on our life
Wow.
for a moment, which was really powerful. Prepare your own eulogy. I mean, all these things to kind of jumpstart the thinking about it. I like to ask people, do you think the picture that is going to be with your funeral notice has been taken yet?
Mm.
As a way to start thinking about it. But what I was going to mention is a hospice social worker and a woman that she had worked with when her husband died. They came up with this idea of the death deck. And it's a series of cards. And it's for families, especially, also friends, to asking all kinds of really specific questions about how you imagine your death, how you imagine what you would like, what you wouldn't like, what is it, what's the best way that you would like to die, all these kinds of things just to get the conversation going. And another colleague of mine had the idea to set up, she calls it death overdrafts, and it's meetings at bars where everyone gets together and plays those games while having a drink. Why not? Right? So we're going to have the links to that as part of this podcast. I think you're going to have an area where people can see. So
Yes,
death overdrafts and the death deck. Great
I think those are
concepts.
both great. I've seen the death deck, and I love that. And I did when here in Hawaii after Ron died. I wasn't really sure who to go to or where to go to for any help or whatever it was. I didn't even know what I needed. And somebody that I had met invited me to go to a death cafe.
Yes.
And it was wonderful. We met at a Mexican restaurant and had nachos and cerveza, and we just talked about anything related to death. And everybody could there was no judgment. Everybody just said what they wanted to say or supported each other or whatever happened. And I went to that for a while, and the man who was doing it had gotten so busy. He said, I just don't know that I can keep doing this. And I said, well, would you like me to take it over for you? So I actually ran it for a while here. And it was a good place to go to have something different, because I didn't want to go. My husband Jacques had run a bereavement group with a marriage, family, child counselor that he knew, and he would come home and talk to me about it and say, everybody cries and they come and they tell the same story every time. And that was kind of my impression of what it would be like to go to a death or a group talking about grief. And I knew I didn't want to do that. I was working on learning how to be happy, and taking care of myself, and to go and repeat telling the same story. And I believe you have to tell the story. And the more often you tell the story, the shorter it'll get. So I think that's really important. So going someplace like a death cafe or Brews, what did you say, Brews, and the name of the
death overdraft.
Death overdrafts. That's what it was. Yeah. I love that. I think it's a great idea, because it normalizes the fact that, as we mentioned earlier, we're all going to die. And so you might as well make the best of it.
Face it or not, but it's going to happen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm so glad we got a chance to talk about all this. It's a lot of the stuff that people don't talk about. And I just encourage everybody who's listening to have this conversation, to talk about, tell somebody what you want. There's books out there that are like fill in the blanks books if you want to do it. Yeah. One that was real popular is
websites.
All kinds of stuff.
I'll mention a website that I think is spectacular. It's called Get Your Shit Together.
Oh, cool.
And it was started by a woman whose husband died suddenly, and she wasn't able to access their bank accounts. She didn't know the password for his phone. They had never talked about his wishes for a funeral. So she created a template where all these things are in one place. So now everybody knows.
Yeah, it's so good. The last couple of years I don't know exactly when it came out. There's a book called I'm Dead Now What? And it's that sort of
There
thing
you
where
go.
it's a book and you just fill in the blanks and then you can give it to whoever you want to give it to so that
Right.
they'll know.
Well,
And
it's a document also.
yeah,
It's something you can, leave
it's
behind. It's excellent.
it's really, really important to do that. So I really strongly encourage everybody to do something like that.
Yeah.
And at least to talk to somebody and to tell somebody what they want.
So live your best life and make
That's
sure
right.
that you have the best death. There's there is a term called, saying there's such thing as a good death.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's everyone believes in that, but there certainly are bad deaths.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
on that note,
Yes. Gave you a lot to think about today. So go think about it and act on it. That's what's important, is to act on it and make it
yeah,
so that your death or the death of your loved ones can be the best it can be, because it can be better. It
there
really
you go.
can. I've witnessed it
You're
in
proof
lots
of
of
it.
different situations. So, yep. So thank you so much for being my guest, and we'll
Thank
have
you.
all those links in the show notes for the podcast. And I just hope you all think about this. So, and I will see you next time. I'm so grateful that you listen to our podcast. Aloha. Do you want more comfort, support, and happiness? Join the Grief and Happiness Alliance. Visit my website at lovingandlivingyourwaythroughgrief.com and read my book, Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast, rate it, review it, and binge on all our episodes on grief and happiness. I can't wait to welcome you back to another episode